comment. So in terms of the multiple choice, make sure that you read the questions carefully. Make sure that you read every answer. I just realized that this is incorrect, so please ignore that. But yeah, make sure you read your questions carefully. You read every answer. So reading questions carefully, make sure you're highlighting, you're underlining, especially for things like multiple choice, where some of the options may seem really similar. Just make sure that you're able to pick apart the differences. Cross out the incorrect answer or part, and underline and highlight, and make notes. Basically, make sure that if you feel like, oh, there's two options that I feel like might be the answer, let me actually make note as to what this is. Let me make note as to what that is, and then I can differentiate between the two. Breaking down human rights questions. So first of all, look at the mark allocation. How many marks are allocated? This is a really good indication of how much you should be writing. Look at how much you need to write. You're given the lines. Those lines are there as a guideline as to how much you should be writing. Please don't go way over and please don't go under. Try and make it as similar as you can to the amount of lines given. If you go over, you're wasting time. If you go under, you're probably going to not get the full marks, okay? Look at the directive term. So what's the HSC verb at hand? And if you do a quick Google search and you go into the NESA website, you can find a glossary of all the HSC verbs. I would highly recommend reading through those, highlighting the ones that you see most often in your papers, your past papers, and being able to understand how to answer those. That's a really, really big tip that I would give everybody, is to go and just do that. It will take maybe half an hour to do, or less than half an hour, but it will help you out tremendously, as it did for me. Look what parts of the human rights syllabus it's coming from. So again, syllabus, syllabus, syllabus. We talked about the importance of this earlier, so I won't dwell too much on it, but again, just make sure that you understand how important that is. So now I've got a bunch of human rights questions. So outline how international human rights are incorporated into Australian domestic law. So how can we break this question apart? First of all, it's an outline question, so we don't need to go into heaps of detail. 2 marks associated with questions, so the potential ways that you could get the 2 marks. You could talk about how it's incorporated into common law with precedents and courts. You could talk about legislation, or you could talk about incorporation through the enshrinement of a constitution, which are the 3 main ways really that we can get law incorporated into our system. So have a think about how you could answer this question. I'm going to just pause here and give you a bit of time to come up with a response, and then we can continue on from there. So hopefully you've had the chance to answer that. We're now going to do the same thing for this question. So outline how trade unionism can protect labor rights. So that's the question. We first of all want to think about where your 3 marks are going to come from. Number 1, define what trade unionism is. Number 2, what about collective bargaining? Right? And number 3, can we provide legal advice to workers? Yes or no? And then what does that have to do with the question? Have a think about it. And then you can also integrate a case law example. For example, Australian Labor Party, if you're stuck and you need to find marks, that can be a good way to still get those marks. Okay, so again, have a think about how you would approach this. I'll give you a bit of time to answer that one, and then we can go from there. So hopefully, again, you've had the chance to have a look at that and figure out a sample response. But again, just try and break the questions down like this. I've also got another example for you all to have a look at in your own time. So you could definitely, so you've got access to these slides, so you could definitely do this one and then practice a couple more in your own time as well. But essentially just trying to get you guys to get in the hang of doing these types of questions and being able to break them down in this way. A few other tips. Remember that time is short. Don't waste your time. The best way to do this is by knowing your verbs, right? So again, I would recommend going onto the NESA website, going to HSC verbs, picking out the ones that you know that are really commonly assessed in your subjects and understanding how to effectively answer those and looking at the sample answers on the NESA website as well from your past papers and seeing how people have answered those in the past to get full marks. So here are some of them that I've done for legal studies, but also you can have a look for your other subjects, but these are the ones that I've seen and I know are really common. So account for, analyze, assess, compare, contrast, define, describe, discuss. So the for and against is always discuss, distinguish, to recognize what the differences are, evaluate, examine, explain, which is cause and effect, identify, which is recognize and name, and outline. So for example, here's a discuss question. So discuss whether Australia should have a Charter of Rights. So you want to be able to provide or identify issues and provide points for and or against this. So what are the advantages of a Charter of Rights and what are the disadvantages of a Charter of Rights? So writing a response that only says that we should have a Charter of Rights will only get you a maximum of half of the marks, because again, it's a discuss question, so you need to know for and against. So you need to mention that as well, right? So really, really important, and I would highly recommend that you do this, because if you didn't know, for example, that in this question you would have to mention for and against, then you could potentially only get half of the marks, right? Or you won't be able to get the total amount of marks. So being able to understand those is really, really important. So this is why I put that in there, to help you recognize that. Here's another example. So explain how the Australian Human Rights Commission or another independent statutory authority promotes human rights. So explain as cause and effect. So you want to be able to talk about that in more detail in terms of how it's able to do the promotion of human rights, or how it's able to promote human rights. How can you promote? Raising public awareness, bringing forward an issue, etc. So here's an example. The Australian Human Rights Commission is a national institute that promotes human rights through awareness programs. So that's the how, or campaigns, and dealing with human rights issues. In addition, the Australian Human Rights Commission prepares and releases, again, explaining the how, reports concerning human rights. And then you give an example. So you're showing evidence of how it's done that. So bringing them home report. So compare the contributions of common law and statute law in enforcing human rights. So common law versus statute law, you want to be able to identify both sides and then be able to distinguish and compare the two, right? So common law, what sorts of things do we look at? Statute law, what sorts of things that we look at? I've got some pointers there, but I will just let you guys just have a go at answering this question in your own time using those notes, and then be able to continue that process and making sure that you are referring to the correct HSC verbs as well.